Welcome back to another episode of the TFD Performance Podcast. This week, we are running with the theme of all things mental performance. This is an episode that I've been very excited about bringing to life. I'm joined by Dr. Erik Simmon and Terrel Porter. If these names don't sound particularly familiar off the gate, you will recognize them because lately, a lot of content around what we call the TFD Mindset Corner. And these are the gentlemen behind that. Erik, Terrell, thanks for coming on.
Hey, it was great.
Thanks so much for having us, Jordy.
All right, I'm going to go through this one at a time, but let's give a quick little elevator pitch and we'll go the 30-second elevator pitch. Tell the audience everything they need to know about who you guys are, what you do. We're going from floor 1 to floor 4. We got a minute max. Erik, let's kick over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, man. As Jordy said, my name is Dr. Erik Simmon. As far as my scientific credentials go, I got my PhD from the University of Queensland in psychological sciences. Currently, I'm a research fellow at Boston College, formerly a senior science advisor at Evident, a multinational behavioral consultant company, and a project coordinator from the World Bank. My expertise is in psychological sciences, behavioral systems theory and diagnosis, implementation science, and social ecological systems. And to put it simply, I sit at the nexus of research and applied evidence, and I'm really just a behavior engineer. I take the evidence and I translate it into insights and tools that can help people improve their lives and their well-being. And on that too, I'm also a lifelong martial artist. I was a former competitive wrestler. I was never very good myself, but I was teammates with very elite names on a global stage, the likes of people like Kyle Snyder. And such, so I grew up seeing really elite athletes perform. And the former head wrestling coach of SASM MMA in Southeast Queensland. That's me.
Yeah, that's how Erik and I connected, by Erik folding me up and throwing me on my back far too many times and just beating my ego down. But Terrell, give us a little pitch about yourself.
I'm Terrell. Studying psychology at the moment at university. 2.5 years into the course. I was a Muay Thai fighter. That's how me and Jordy got connected, like years ago now. He's run pretty much all my fight camps. I've just been helping out the team with the Mindset Corner.
Yeah, excellent. And it's such a cool little combination, right? Like this little trio. And I think this is something, as my career has gone on, I've just realized how underutilized the mental side of this is. And it's not just for the performance, it's everything outside of performance for these guys. And that's why what we're doing with the Mindset Corner and even getting this and highlighting it to the combat sports community is so cool. Like Erik has said, he's a high level wrestler that was a head coach of a gym for years and years and years, and has coached many great athletes. And Terrell's a martial artist. He's gone through it. He's seen the fire. He's been there. We've worked together for years and years, and now he's studying the actual science behind it. So it's really cool to bring this to light. I guess both of you guys are in the field of behavioral science. If you're listening to this and you don't understand what behavioral science is, I'm going to throw it over to Dr. Erik. Break it down, Erik. What is it? Behavioral science in the most simplest sense. What is it?
Yeah, and I'm going to break this down into 2 responses, both very simple. So let's start with behavioral science, and then I am going to define mindset because I think that's important too. We use that term quite a bit. In terms of behavioral science, it's made up of a whole bunch of subdisciplines and sciences that's meant to help us understand why we behave, the things we feel, the things we think, our cognitive patterns, and the things that drive or influence the way we engage with the world. And then find the most effective tools from evidence, what we might call behavioral tools, within our toolkit that we can apply to help people achieve their goals, live better lives, be healthier, attain all of the things that we find the most desirable about life. Now, I say it as the broadest spectrum of what we can say for a definition of behavioral science. My particular discipline in that is psychological and social sciences. But also mindset, which is really just a compilation of a core set of beliefs or assumptions that we might have about a particular category or domain. And this is what drives our expectations, our explanations of how we approach the world and engage with the world for that particular domain, and our goals and patterns of behavior toward that domain. So this can really have an impact on a lot of the ways that we interact with the people around us. We interact with particular disciplines, being martial arts, being the way we eat. And this can also have, impacts at a physiological level, which I'm sure we'll get into. So that's my very brief capture there of what behavioral science is, and then more specifically where mindset sits within that.
Terrell, I want to go over to you and ask you this question and let me know if there is truth to it. But was there any influence, like being in martial arts and having that background, that drew you towards behavioral science?
There was definitely, I saw parallels between the things that you learn in martial arts and psychology as like a discipline. I was interested in psychology since maybe like grade 10. So I got to psychology through philosophy, and that was my path into it. And then just seeing like the life lessons that you get through martial arts and how they actually apply to just being a better person, I was like, okay, why don't we put these things together and then help people, like either just in the normal community or within the fight space as well.
Yeah, I think this is a good segue into this next question. I'll throw it back over to you, Erik. Is why did you feel this was needed in the combat sports community? Why did you feel a group like this was needed?
Yeah, and I'm actually going to start with a story here, Jordy, and it's the story of the first time we met, which actually, wasn't me blast doubling you. I think the first time we met, actually, you were just kicking off your career. I was just starting at SASM. And I remember being involved in one of these fight camps for one of our colleagues, one of our friends, one of our teammates, and him saying, "Hey man, we got this Jordy guy, he trains here, and he can help us with our weight cuts, our fight camps to make sure we're properly fueled and getting down to weight." And me being a classic, old traditional weight cut bro science wrestler, I was like, what do you need a guy like that for? Just don't eat, stop drinking the day before, whatever it is, just make weight, do whatever you got to do to make weight. And I remember going to that first weight cut, talking to you a little bit, and just feeling like I had such an egg on my face there of saying, this is a professional service. I can't believe I felt prey to my own biases of thinking that I knew better, a little Dunning-Kruger effect of feeling that I had an expertise in something I had very little understanding in. And that immediately clicked for me to say, well, we need more professional services. We need more people like Jordy with a mission of integrating and infusing evidence into our practices in this space, because every elite sport does it. So to think of and looking around and seeing all of my teammates, seeing the people I was coaching, and seeing other coaches as well, not using the best evidence-based learning strategies to have their athletes learn how to not only train properly, or to master techniques, but also how to live good lives, to manage all of the stressors that come with being an athlete. This is one of the most incredible experiences being within combat sports in the world. And I think it really does, to Terrell's point, build, extremely virtuous character. So to use evidence-based tools from psychological and social sciences, behavioral sciences in general, that can help us do that easier, to remove some of those barriers for us, to help us be not only successful in our careers as combat sports athletes, but also as people. Why not use the best evidence out there? Why not use the tools that we know science has delivered for us? And a final point I'll close on, and I'll let Terrell say something here, and then I think we can talk about this as well, is I just see this area, Jordy, is just rife with misconceptions and myths that I think need debunking. And I think we really do need good researchers in this space, good scientists and good practitioners. So also making sure that there are no harmful misconceptions out there about mental health, about behavior, and about how we approach learning and training.
Yeah, it's a good point, right? And I think it's funny in martial arts because the disciplines of martial arts are so beautiful. And once you're in it, there's so much learning to be had, but really at its core, they're so archaic. And when we're talking about what people do within those martial arts, the archaic tradition is almost to the detriment nowadays. And I think in other mainstream sports, especially when you get to the US and you have like the college mainstream sports, there's so much money and time invested in there that if you're not getting the best services and the most evidence-based practice in every aspect of your performance, you're just not going to make the team. Like literally where there's differences between 0.01 seconds between this kid's dream coming true and this kid's dream falling to pieces. It's insane how much effort they put. But for martial arts, it's almost behind the 8 ball in that. And I guess that's what everyone that's in this space, it's almost we're trying to bring that science and bring the light, because there is so much that you can bring to enhance the sport And you can do it in so many different ways, whether it be your nutrition, strength conditioning, training programs, whether it's your mental health. Terrell, what's your experience, obviously coming through martial arts for years?
It was always the, you just got to survive sort of thing. And it's just going to be brutal the whole way. I think it does like ingrain some good things, but there are definitely ways to go about it where more people would have access to it if it wasn't so brutal. So you can still get gains, which is like actually evidence-based, where you can like pull off a little bit and people will go longer and go further. But yeah, it was definitely archaic, and it still is. Like you go into a lot of gyms, they're just meathead gyms, where it's just you just got to tough it out. So you don't have to. It's the same.
Jordy, you make such a great point there, and to speak to that, to provide another endorsement or advocation for what's being said here, that Terrell's speaking to, and that you're speaking to as well. We talk so much, and you talk a lot about, which has been very inspiring, about fueling that 1%, making sure that you're living a life and a career that's going to be sustainable, to represent longevity and prepare you for life, after the sport or between performances, right? Even. And that comes with a lot of attention to detail. And as Terrell's saying, it is going to be grueling. That's just the nature of this space. It's going to be grueling. But if it's going to be grueling, then let's at least use the most efficient tools to make sure you're getting the most out of it. To make sure you're behaving in a way that's going to allow you to master techniques the best, to manage, your relationship with the sport, to make sure you're not burning out. And there's just such a wealth and abundance of behavioral tools, different types of interventions that you can use to approach your sport, to approach your life outside the sport, to make your life better, to make your performances better, and so on. So when you talk about fueling that 1% and this literally being the difference between dreams being achieved or not being achieved, I think you're completely correct in saying that we really do need the best evidence, and your audience is going to need no convincing in thinking that, well, how much does my mental inner life and the external types of social and psychological interactions we have play a role in my success or my well-being, or even my joy and satisfaction in engaging with this sports. And if there's any athlete out there who would say, oh, I don't use my mind at all, I don't think, I would be very open to having a conversation with that person. But I think this is why we need such a focus in this space, particularly right now.
Yeah, it's a good point, right? And I want to preface this by saying, when we're talking about this, I don't want people to be like, oh, these guys are turning us soft. Do they want to, oh, you have to be. Yeah, I agree. Like sport in general, one of the best part about it is that the mental gains that you get, and it does harden you, for lack of a better term. What we're saying here is that nowadays we appreciate how much of an impact that mental performance has on the physical outcome of whatever you're doing. And yes, like Terrell's saying, you go to a traditional Muay Thai gym and you're doing 7,000 push-ups and 18,000 sit-ups and then running the block before you even start. Yes, that's going to build a lot of grit and perseverance and whatnot. What we know nowadays is that, yes, that's very important, but what we want to do is find the most efficient way to get there and then expand that box. And then what might be just achievable by physically destroying yourself, we might be able to achieve that times 10 if we put this evidence-based practice into those development strategies. So let's get into the mental health, the mental enhancement survey that you guys put together and set out. I don't want to butcher it. I'm going to throw it over to you, Erik. Talk to us about what it is and what we were trying to achieve with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So just on that point, Jordy, and I would second that point. I think there's a lot of things about the perseverance, resilience that these sports build. And while I think, feelings, mood is all really important and can have an impact on the way you train, the way you perform, the way you live your life. These things are meant to be seen as amplifications or enhancers, rather than detriments or turning our attention away from the things that we care about. And, as we're looking at the research we're doing here, I would like to also point out these things have very physiological effects. So mindset, your cognitions and perceptions oftentimes sit as a mediating factor, which means they sit in between the way you think and how your body has very real metabolic and physiological responses to things. And happy to go into that in a second, Jordy, if you find that useful for your audience and worthwhile use of our time here. But just to talk briefly about what we're looking for in our survey here and then beyond is we're really seeking to identify how some of these psychological and what I think is kind of the missing element right now, the social and systemic factors that surround athletes and how these things impact or influence the way we not only approach our nutrition, but also how we approach our training, how we approach our well-being, and how we, approach overall how we can live better lives as combat sports athletes. So it's looking not only at nutrition and diet, that's one pillar, but in a second pillar there, we're also looking at how we can enhance training and performance outcomes. And as a third pillar, we want our athletes living the best possible lives. And to do that, you need to understand social sciences and psychology, behavior at large.
Let's go into it. We obviously sent this out and we got quite a good response, which was really, really cool. What did we find? What were the things that we found from this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're finding some really cool things here, and we're not going to cover all the findings here, but I think this opens the door for a lot of opportunities for us to hop back on and talk about these things as we discover them. But I think we are running a large spectrum of findings here of how internal things like executive functions for people who are unaware, unfamiliar, executive functions are kind of that evolved cortex that we possess in our prefrontal lobe. That helps us do things like monitor our actions, to make plans, to consider counterfactuals. It's a very advanced cognitive system that allows us to make decisions that make us uniquely human. And in these executive functions, we're seeing differences in how people approach their expectations around their diet and nutrition plans. We're seeing differences in how people interact socially with their teammates. We're seeing differences in people's levels of self-control. So things to that degree of internal cognitive factors that dictate the patterns and govern how we approach our days, our planning, are really robust findings that we're seeing right now. Talking about how that affects eating and dieting is really important, and seeing how we can identify pitfalls early that might lead to some forms of disordered eating, or issues in adhering to particular diet plans is really useful for us moving down the track to be able to make diets more effective and make nutrition plans more effective. And then externally as well, one thing that I'm really passionate about and seeing as being a very strong initiative of this as well is for us to be able to identify system and social factors and features that allow us to perform better. I think social norms and social identity theory are massive components of identifying system structures that we can help to address, coaching obstacles or coaching barriers, as well as performance obstacles and barriers that help us improve diets and improve performance. And I can stick on an example here of something we're finding in this literature and our research that is clear to me is an easy win moving forward. Jordy and Terrell, I'm sure you guys have been through this. I'm sure most people listening have been through this. You go into the gym, you finish a grueling session, everyone's going to KFC afterwards. What are you more likely to do? Go to KFC or go home and eat that diet plan that Jordy just gave you? Let's go to KFC, So social norms and how we categorize ourselves with groups and how we align ourselves with those values and patterns of behavior within those groups is also something that we're seeing emerge in our findings that we can target to adjust and modify for better results in nutrition and performance.
Yeah, that's a cool point. I'm going to ask you this, Terrell, because we've obviously worked together for quite a long time, as you said, especially when I came into this field and like we were talking about, very archaic, very old traditions. Nothing wrong with that. There's good and bad to that with martial arts. But when I came into the field and I'm saying to these guys, hey, don't go to KFC after, go home and eat this because it's better for it. It's not just the fact that these guys, look, they know that KFC probably isn't the best, but it's almost that pressure of the team, right? Like being like, oh, everyone's going, I don't want to be this guy. Or them coming and being like, I'm the only guy that's seeing this dietitian and I'm doing something new. There's a whole lot of social pressures that come with that. Terrell, have you experienced that in your experience with the Muay Thai and being in the gym and with your teammates? Like, because you were obviously getting onto this quite early. Like we've worked together for years. Did you experience any pullback from your teammates or your coaches when you were coming up and saying, hey, look, I'm doing this new diet thing. I'm doing this different approach to weight cutting. What was that like?
It was, it was pretty well accepted, I think. But it was always approached with skepticism, where it was like, okay, is this actually going to work, or do we just go back to like the tried true method, I guess? It was like the old school weight cuts where you're sitting in the sauna for hours and not drinking and that sort of thing. But for my team, they were they were interested. Like they gave me a couple of fights where they're like, okay, we'll just see. And then eventually when some more people were coming through that were fighting, they were going, all right, what's Geordie's number sort of thing. Just because they saw how much pressure was released, especially fight week, just not having to think about weight. That was always on point. So it was always approached with skepticism, but I think people are opening up to it more.
Yeah, and I think this is a big point why I'm so interested in this research is because I can have all the best science in the world, and I can do this with the top guys. I can get Israel Adesanya, I can get Alexander Volkanovski, all these guys to do this, and then to sing my praise and say, look, this is the way to do it. But really at a grassroots level, the biggest issue I find with our team and making a big impact is changing these social environments, changing the expectations of teams, the social norms when you go into a gym of, okay, yeah, this is normal to do this and to cut weight like this and to have all of these behaviors around your food. So this is why it's really cool. I'm going to throw this one back to you, Erik. We're talking about all these behaviors, and I want to ask you this. Is there theoretically an ideal set of behaviors for adherence to a diet protocol or a training regime or anything like that? Is there a theoretical framework where if you looked at it, it'd be like, yeah, this would be the ideal athlete if they followed X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, I mean, and depending on the scientist you ask, they're going to give you different models for adherence. Of course, we have ours that we use to develop this theory. We primarily operate off of social cognitive theory, which has been a well-established framework within the field, which essentially says, we're going to take inputs from your patterns of thinking being your cognitions, so adult and social learning theories of how we vicariously model. It's something that's not often talked about, but if Izzy walks in and Izzy has a Big Mac every day, guess what else everyone else in the gym is doing? And the same goes for gear. You walk into gyms, you see everyone with the same gear, and usually it starts at the top of that leadership and then it's vicariously modeled. So making adjustments to things like that is important. Is there a frame of a way to do this? No. And I think that's where behavioral diagnosis becomes a massive thing at play, and systems diagnosis to look at, what are the barriers for best practice adoption here? What are some of the implementation strategies we can say? And this is across so many domains of behavior, not just dieting and nutrition. Dieting and nutrition is a big one, but exercise at large, our spending habits, how we engage with environmental, based concerns, anything you can really think of. But looking at some of the primary drivers and obstacles of behavior, and then making modifications to the things that are modifiable. Some things you're just not going to be able to change about people. A genetic proclivity to really, really, crave chocolate is something that might sit with you that you've inherited. However, there are so many things you can do to help not eat chocolate, if that is one of your goals. I'm not saying go out there and stop trying to eat chocolate if you really have a craving for it. But so I think there's a lot to be said about this big push in behavioral insights for nudging and choice architecture that plays a big role here. There's a lot to be said about environmental modifications. And then personally, I know we do a lot with social cognitive work and cognitive behavioral techniques to help align an entire mission across a team that's going to target the individual as well as communal and team capabilities to let everyone achieve the goals they want to, and to let everyone attain the, as you're saying, optimal diet and nutrition adherence. There's a best practice in every science, in every biochemical science I've ever encountered. There's always a set of recommendations that implicate human behavior that's best practice, and we never quite achieve them because, exactly as you said, Jordy, it always boils down to the nucleus of behavior, and behavioral change being absolutely crucial and vital to unlocking the change toward good systems, good both individual and communal actions.
From the survey, Erik, were there things that were coming out that say were common or typical amongst everyone who participated in it that would be predicting these types of behaviors? Were there certain behaviors that, hey, like, I don't know, this person is always late or this person doesn't clean their gear? Is there like certain behaviors that you can, I don't want to say correlate because that's not great science, but you can start piecing together that, if person A does X, it might lead to Z?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing we're seeing very big is within the self-control space, and I'm saying it's because it does have very good predictive validity currently. So grit and self-control are emerging as really, really important factors to adhering to diets, And not only that, but avoiding emotional and uncontrollable eating. So on the, the complete reciprocal side of adhering to your diet, also the outcomes you expect with your diets, but also avoiding types of pitfalls or traps you might see yourself falling into, where you'd finish a meal or a binge and just be like, I really feel like I didn't want to do that. Grit and self-control are certainly emerging as big ones in that space. I'd say those are really big, as well as executive functions, which we just kind of talked about there. So happy to double click and enter in on that grit and self-control space, because I think it's really great. But I mean, there's also a range of other factors that I think are important we can talk about as well.
Yeah, let's jump into it, because it's something I notice in practice, right? And so let's dive into that grit and self-control. I guess let's explain it, and let's explain why it's relevant to all of this.
Absolutely. And there's a slight distinction to make there. These things are often correlated, but there really is. So what we're considering as grit, we're talking about here is, your ability to maintain a sense of resilience, to move through adversity, and to rebound is probably the best word you can use, back to a state of default, or back to a state of, regular functioning quickly. So it is ability to kind of take it on the chin as you're moving forward. Self-control is a bit different. It is a self-regulatory capacity. And all that really means is it's an exertion of cognitive control that we're using to make decisions of A over B. And as you're saying, it is really having the cognitive tools and the behavioral tools, because I don't want to make this seem like this is all internal to you. That's a big misconception I see in this space is, just get tough internally, just build yourself up, and you'll be fine. It's often the complete opposite, is you can use your behavior to build your capacities for grit, and build your capacities for self-control. So using your external environment and using the way you modify your external environment to actually make yourself more prone to have a high level of grit is a better approach than just really trying to concentrate on getting tough or excelling as the toughest person around. So what we're seeing so far is this tends to be one of the primary factors that's very predictive of you not engaging in eating habits or eating behaviors that are really maladaptive. And what I suspect the mechanism underlying there is probably when you're really hungry and you really want something, you have a craving pop up. The people who are expressing high levels of grit and self-control are most likely using cognitive and behavioral tricks just to forego doing what they were going to do, instead of just hopping in the car and going and getting there. They're saying, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to make this as difficult as possible for me to get to Macca's today, right? They're going to say, I'm not going to keep that tray of Oreos in the house. Therefore, if I really want it, I have to go and get it. So sometimes adding obstacles is really good there. And then that also is demonstrated as high levels of grit. And same thing when things go wrong with grit as well. It's just really being able to cognitively reframe experiences and having patterns of thinking that aren't distorted or unhelpful, that allow you to get back to a normal state of functioning and back to routines. Habit formation is something I see so many myths about that's just so wrong. But really all you need to know about it is that there is an environment of cues and stimuluses that triggers a behavior that's often automatic. That's why we categorize them as habits. And then there's consequences that then reinforce that behavior. But you really need the cues and stimuluses. So the people I see who tend to be really good with self-control are really good with habit formation as well. And I think that's something that we're going to continue to explore as we move through this work.
Can we dive into that a little bit more and expand on it, Erik? Because I know, especially in our space, when we're talking about diet, nutrition, there's a real fine line, right? Like I could say to someone, hey, throw out all the Oreos in the house, or, when you're craving something, go swish your mouth with Listerine or brush your teeth. And that's going to be a behavior that stops you from doing that. But there's a really, really fine line, right? Where you don't want to be encouraged what we call like disordered eating patterns or eating disorders or things like that. Where is that line where we go, okay, these are what we're recommending for positive habit formation that is going to be beneficial to creating a good, environment and behavior cues and everything else. But if we go too far this way, we might be going down that disordered eating pathway. Where is that line and how do you establish it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's two bodies of research that I want to cite here. One of which being Katie Milkman, who does a lot of incredible work on building, building exercise habits and seeing what types of incentives and reinforcement structures are really good. And a lot of her work is exactly what you're saying. When you keep rules too strict around contingencies of if A, then I behave in a certain, context or way, that's always a recipe for disaster, right? So in terms of exercising, having loose rules that are mildly flexible is way better than saying 8 a.m. at every day, I'm going to get up and I'm going to do that exercise, right? When we see over a long period of time, over scale, that not always, but it tends to fail, right? People fall off, and once they miss one, it's a lot easier to lose those streaks. So loosely having rules is better. And as you say, Jordy, once you step over a certain degree or a desire to have something, you really should indulge, as long as it's not something that's happening too frequently. And the second point I would point to is the work of Ali Crum, who also does a lot of research with Dr. Wendy Wood out of Stanford. And there really is no good habit or bad habit, but some things we can do is bundle habits in ways where they're associated with times or other behaviors we do naturally. But if you find yourself in novel circumstances or in instances that allow you to indulge, as long as you have a process of introspection, as long as you have a process of monitoring to help keep you on track, it's something that you can manage. But once again, I think this is something that requires a lot of psychoeducation to learn how you can use things within your behavioral toolkit to make sure that you're not going over this line where you're so regimented and restricted and rigid that you really are entering territory and waters of disordered eating, because that's somewhere we don't really want to see anyone go, versus maintaining that flexibility, but being able to have structure around, your eating, your behavior, so on and so forth. So I would say call on the behavioral tools of flexible scheduling. I would say there's really no such thing as a good habit or bad habit, but understand your environmental cues and when they're going to lead you to do things or not. And sometimes bundle cues, right? If it's something you really want to do every day, bundle it with something like brushing your teeth, but try not to get into a habit of saying, give myself an aversive stimulus every time I have a craving. That's no good, right? So I think these are important things to understand about habits and habit formation that'll keep us honest, but not take us down a path where we're so strict that oftentimes people will inform you, if you mess up, you might as well throw everything out. That's simply not true. So an understanding of that is really important for habit formation.
What would be the practical tips if someone was listening to this and they go, okay, cool, let's say I'm following my diet. What are some things that I can do to monitor my behaviors and be like, okay, this might be a bit of a red flag that I'm doing this, or this is a good behavior? What are some practical tips that they could just start doing right now?
Yeah, so I think a lot of cognitive monitoring is really important. So if you find yourself falling into distorted patterns of thinking where you find increased states of physiological arousal, if you were to miss, a certain meal time, or you were to, as we're talking about here, eat something that you think doesn't quote unquote fit within your regimented diet, that's time to rethink how we're approaching this and rethink our goals and objectives around this, and really start to reassess and replan how we're approaching this space. Because once again, we're all here for living well and good performances, and I think within that is a range of flexibility. So that has to be the case. I would say anytime you are inputting or injecting any type of, and this is going to be definable by every individual person, it's subjective, but aversive stimulus or aversive consequence, to stop you from doing something, or after the fact to say, hey, I just ate this, I really need to do this now to compensate. These are times to reassess. So these are cognitive or possibly even metacognitive processes of monitoring that are going to inform your feedback to address your behavior in the habit space.
So what I'm hearing, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, there's huge potential here for, say, coaches who have control over a whole gym environment to set up certain environments for their athletes to come in that are more beneficial to certain behaviors. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And I think this is something that our work can really pivot on, because lots of times, it's going to sound a bit strange, but stick with me on this analogy. I worked for a guy for many years who was an expert in family psychology. He's really pioneered the space. And one thing he said to me when I first started working with him is, we have about 100 years of experience working on this. And anytime there was, distorted behavior or, problematic behavior in children, we always go straight to the children. And his big innovation was, he said, why are we going straight to the children? They often don't have much control over their environments or their behavior. And oftentimes they don't understand behavior. Why are we not addressing the parents on a lot of these things? And such is the case, I find, with athletes and coaches as well, is while there's a lot of responsibility, we operate in a very, individualistic combat sport environment. It's still a team socialization. It's still a team environment. So coaches who sit at the top of leadership hierarchies and are responsible for organizational change, for implementation of best practices, we need to be working almost mostly with them to help them set the stage for flourishing and thriving environments where it's absolutely hard for you not to adopt the best practices. We want environments where you're coming in and behaviors, social interactions, communication dynamics is all almost set to a default of positive and best practice. Therefore, it's not on each individual athlete to kind of battle to, well, I have to figure out how to train appropriately, how to learn from this person, how to incorporate evidence-based, training practices and diets into my routine. So it really is coaches who set the stage for that social identity leadership and setting the norms and culture of a gym. And that's where a lot of this, behavioral and social science comes in, and really making a diagnosis of systems to say, how is my coach impacting my day-to-day routine, my day-to-day training, my day-to-day diet? Because that stuff matters.
Is that why you often see this happen, where individuals who are highly talented, they do leave certain gyms and they go to other environments, and, they might be under a great coach, but for whatever reason, they're just not gelling with that environment around them. It's not conducive to their success?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think getting an environment and a culture that's conducive for you to thrive is just as important as your own individual ability, your own, I don't like this term, and I'm sure we'll talk about it over the span of our working tenure, but willpower. I think all that stuff kind of sits in second place behind the type of environment and culture that the leadership within your, and this is coaches as well as the elite athletes that operate within your space who've been there for a while, because the setting of trends, the setting of norms, the way by which you go about in terms of adult learning strategy, self-directed learning, which sits very importantly under self-regulation theory and social cognitive theory, that, as we mentioned in the beginning, that vicarious learning experience, what are you getting from watching your coaches and the people who are succeeding? That can have just as much impact on diet, performance, as anything else you do. Whether you're getting up and running 10 miles a day, if you go into an environment that's not conducive for you to thrive, that doesn't allow you to unlock opportunities, that doesn't make behaving in a way that's going to make your performance absolutely perfect, dynamic within your experience, that is why you see people saying, well, listen, I had to leave. The environment was too toxic. That shouldn't be happening. And that is a behavioral problem. That's a social ecology problem more than anything else, and that's just interpersonal dynamics at play.
Terrell, I want to go back to you on this one. Obviously, you being in Muay Thai gyms for years, after learning all of this, what's it like on your end? Do you just sit back and go, oh, wow, like if I could change this about this gym that I trained in, whether it was positive or negative, I would do X, Y, and Z. Does that run through your head after you learn all of these things?
Yeah, it does, for sure. Just because, the benefits that can come out of it. So I don't know, you can get a lot more out of an athlete by having a good culture than, having a new person come in and they just don't even want to be there purely because of the culture that's there. So I think it's creating a few barriers, not just for the athletes, but for the gyms as well, not allowing people to come through. So, yeah.
Yeah. And this is for all the coaches out there, positive reinforcement and positive social dynamics is a way more powerful tool than the stick. I don't know what the stick looks like in each gym. But that's true in your life, and that's true for your athletes as well. Is that's a lot more important than being a harsh disciplinarian in terms of motivating behavior and motivating progress toward goals.
Now, James, I know we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours on end, and I think we'll better serve everyone if we dive into each separate episode and go through all of these concepts. So we'll wrap this one up, but I do want, Erik, can you give us, if people are listening to this and go, this sounds insanely interesting and I want to use this, even if it's an individual athlete, let's address that first, the individual athlete, and then also a coach that's listening to this going, oh shit, like I could probably implement a lot of this in my gym. What would you say to the athlete and then to the coach who are saying, how do I use this? How do I use this information? I want to do better.
Yeah. So let me go through a couple here recommendations that I can think of. I'm going to do one broad one for all athletes seeking to pursue their goals, and it's going to be a little shocking for everyone, but I hope that's kind of what we get out of this. And then I'm also going to do one or two for athletes and then one for coaches. So let's start with one on a myth I kind of saw today that I'd like to bust about visualization, because I think visualization is something that comes up for training and how we eat, how we diet. Seeing yourself having the right diet or seeing yourself being an expert in your training or performance. I hear a lot on the loftiness of goals and that big visualization, wake up every day and see yourself at the top of that mountain as the champion of the world. And I want to sit here today and tell everyone, while that is very good for getting you started down the path, it is abysmal for maintaining motivation towards your goal in an intermediate sense. So what's a lot more useful is actually being able to visualize things you fear, things that make you anxious about not sticking to your plan or not sticking to your routine. And I'm going to give you context because I know, Jordy, we just talked about how that can kind of lead to disordered things. But even thinking about, if I don't go to practice today, what's that going to do for my overall health, well-being down the line, is a lot better motivator to keep you on track than saying, oh, I really want to be champion of the world or champion of my particular promotion. So try to think in intermediate senses for your goals when you're visualizing, and try to think about things that could go wrong or could fail if you're not adhering to what you say you want to do. And that, of course, comes with a degree of flexibility. So that's one thing I think athletes can do. It's a really useful trick in terms of goal motivation and goal attainment. I'm going to stick here with the athlete. Another thing I think is important is cognitive reframing, being able to interrogate your patterns of thought, which is really important. I think one of the best examples of this is with anxiety. If you get anxious about performance or training, the physiological response for feeling anxious and feeling excited are the exact same. So it really is about your cognitive frame on those things. So having the capacity to step back, to engage in that process of self-talk with yourself, and to then look at how are these thoughts and patterns of thinking either serving me or disservicing me. And let's jump over to coaches here. For coaches, I think having a real think about social influences and social norms within your gyms is incredibly important. So the norms of, does everyone rock up 5 minutes late? What are people doing when you're demonstrating? How do people interact with each other when class is over? Just being observant of that is useful and important, and to start to try to use the leadership structures within your gym to manage and modify norms to be in service of your overall objectives as a team is important for coaches. And of course, we're going to be putting out a lot of content on how exactly to do that. But that's really important, I see, for both athletes and gyms there. And of course, I got to say, you got to stick along on the journey for us to really get everything here. I think we're going to have a lot of key insights on this, because as we've mentioned, these mindset things can have an impact on your physiological responses to how you process nutrition, how your metabolism is going. So this is not just how are you feeling type stuff. Your behaviors impact your physiological responses to things. And they're also going to be the key engine to how you attain your nutrition and performance goals. So that's what I give out there to all the athletes and coaches listening.
Terrell, what would be your biggest tip to a fellow athlete knowing what you know now, being an athlete that's been there, gone through it all, and now knowing what you know now, what would be your biggest tips to an athlete?
To an athlete, still be a student, like still be willing to learn. But if you're going to walk into a gym, make sure you gel with it. Make sure it's in line with your beliefs and what you value and what you want to get out of the sport. But yeah, just come back to being a student. Go out there and actively look for these sorts of things. So that way you can, one, develop as a good person, but you can start to notice the red flags when you go into gyms and like the bad patterns of behavior. So yeah, just be a student.
Yeah, be mindful. All right, Dr. Erik, I'm going to let you sign us off. What is coming up? What are we working on in this space? What's coming up next?
Absolutely. So as many of us have been following along here, we are continuing to analyze and find results. Stay tuned every other week or so for results and findings from the Mindset Corner. And where we're really moving with this, Jordy, this is the big vision. And as we've talked about, is just having this coordination unit of hub of professional services to make sure our athletes are performing at an elite level and have access to as much insights, science and evidence as any other sport out there on the planet. So what we're looking to do is build a repository of services, of insights, of applicable tools and techniques that anyone can take away and use it to help guide their diet and nutrition planning, as well as their training schedule and regimenting, and to help enhance their performance, because we want to see our athletes thrive as well as live incredible lives. So we're really looking for a suite of tools that we can build out here through the insights that we're finding in our findings to allow athletes to eat well, to live well, and to perform well. And that's what you're going to see from us over the next couple of months and years.
Yeah, very, very, very excited to what to come. I think there's so many layers and so many levels to this. Like I said, combat sports has traditionally kind of taken a backseat, but now with, the UFC being in ESPN, it's really been rocketed into the mainstream. And I really do feel that to take it to the next level, we need all of this. We need the same treatment that NFL, NHL, NBA, all of those sports get, and at all levels, not just once the guys get to the top. You need to do this at the grassroots. You need to build it up and develop these guys. This is such a huge component to that. Very last thing I want to touch on before we go, if people are listening to this and they go, holy shit, I need to know more about Dr. Erik. I need to know more about Terrell. Dr. Erik Simmons, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Coach Simmons. Oftentimes under Jordy's posts for the Mindset Corner, if you're just looking for an easy way to locate me, as well as Erik Simmons 6 on Twitter.
Excellent. Terrell, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, they can go on my Instagram. I'm usually tagged in the Mindset Corner, so my link will be in there.
Yeah, excellent. All right, gentlemen, I'm sure we're going to have lots of good discussion about this in the future. But again, thank you guys so much for taking the time, and we'll chat soon.
Cool.
Thank you, Jordy.